You finally came back!
The gallery had been empty for 11 minutes when Olivia touched the painting. She knew the exact number because she'd checked her phone when the last couple disappeared around the far corner. The man pulling the woman gently by the hand, their voices dropping as the corridor swallowed them. And the east wing had gone quiet in the particular way old buildings went quiet when no one was performing for anyone. The overhead fixtures were older back here, casting light that was yellower and softer than the main halls, and the floor was lacquered dark wood that registered every step. Hers were the only ones. She'd taken a wrong turn following the printed map, the kind of map that was more decorative than useful, laminated with a cheerful institution logo, and sized too small to read without squinting. Left when she should have gone right, and here she was in a corridor she had no name for, with a painting at the far end that stopped her moving before she'd consciously decided to stop. It was enormous. Floor to ceiling, framed in dark carved wood that age had worn smooth at the corners, the lacquer surrendered long ago to time. Even from a distance, she could feel something radiating off the canvas. Not warmth exactly, but a quality of presence, the specific weight of something that had been watching the room for a very long time. The subject was a man, Korean, imperial, dressed in robes the color of winter midnight with threads of gold at the edges that caught the overhead light and held it too long. His posture was the posture of someone who had never in his life been required to make himself smaller. His face was turned 3/4 from the viewer. His eyes were not. Olivia had enough art history to recognize the technique. The painted gaze engineered to follow movement across a room, an illusionist's trick that worked on the geometry of shadows and highlights. She explained this to herself quietly as she walked closer. Repeated it when she was close enough to read the bronze plaque beside the frame. The letters blurred. She leaned in, blinked hard, leaned closer still. The text stayed unintelligible, not the soft unfocusing of tired eyes, but something active, the information itself deflecting, as if the name on that plaque was not meant for her yet. She was still trying to read it when she noticed his shoulders had shifted. He had turned his head, fully toward her now, both eyes. The painted gaze that was supposed to be a compositional trick was looking at her with the specificity of someone who had been waiting for a particular person and had just confirmed the identification. Olivia's hand went to the wall beside her without instruction from her brain. The wall was there, cold plaster, real. The protective glass that should have been in front of the painting was gone. She hadn't registered its absence, had been too occupied with the plaque, with the face, and so her hand, reaching for ballast, reached past where the glass should have been and found the canvas itself. Her fingertips met the surface before any rational protocol could intervene. The frame cracked at the lower left corner with a sound like green wood splitting in winter, sharp, definitive, a sound that carried finality in it. The fracture ran upward in a jagged diagonal and light came through it. Not the gallery's overhead yellow, but something internal, ember-colored, intimate and terrible. The light of something that had been sealed for too long and was no longer willing to stay sealed. Inside the painting, the robes moved. One step forward. His hand came through the canvas first, long fingers. Cold in the way old stone was cold, not the absence of warmth but the presence of something older than warmth. They closed around her wrist with a grip that was not violent and was not negotiable, the grip of someone who had been waiting in the dark for 14 years and was not confused about what came next. His voice was low and exact and landed in the center of her chest like something she had heard before and could not place. "You finally came back." She pulled against the grip.
I don't know you.
The gallery offered nothing to push from. Her free hand closed on the frame, and the wood came apart in her fingers, dissolving like ash from something already burned, leaving nothing to push against. The light from the fracture went white and the pull stopped feeling like gravity from a direction she recognized. The canvas sealed behind her. No sound. No residue. In the gallery corridor, from behind the far column, a figure emerged. They stood in the empty east wing and looked at the painting, intact, frame undamaged, the lacquered arc wood showing no mark of what had just passed through it. The man in the painting faced 3/4 away again. Eyes forward. The figure stayed with it for a moment. Not grieving, not surprised. Then they walked out through the service exit, and their footsteps on the lacquered wood were the last human sound the east wing held for a long time. The other side arrived without ceremony. Stone under her palms, cold and ancient and insisting on its own reality. The grit of it between her fingers real in a way that prioritized itself over everything else. She was in a courtyard. The sky overhead was wrong. Not the wrong of clouds or weather, but structurally wrong. Too many stars arranged in shapes she had no language for, pressing down through air that smelled of cedar smoke and incense, and something frying in oil somewhere far below in the city she could not yet see. The eaves above her curved in the way of roof tiles that had held rain for centuries. Red lanterns at intervals threw orange light across stone worn smooth by the specific friction of 10,000 feet over many generations. She got herself upright. Her hands were shaking, and she closed them into fists until they stopped. The courtyard was populated. A line of imperial guards on either side of the stone path, armored, standing with the stillness of men trained to be furniture when required. At their head, a man shorter than the guards but carrying himself in a way that compressed the available space around him. Dark hair secured beneath a structured officer's cap. Eyes that had been on her before she pushed herself off the ground, tracking her from the moment of arrival with the specific attention of someone who had anticipated this but needed to verify the details. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man confirming a shipment. Olivia opened her mouth.
I don't know you. I don't know
What
where
came
I
out
am.
was not a question but
Your
a
hand
name.
came through a
Park
painting and pulled me
Jun-hyuk.
through it, and
She
I
had
need you
no
to tell
idea
me
where
what
it
is
came
happening.
from. Neither did he. Apparently, something moved in his expression before he locked it back down. He held her gaze for 2 more seconds, then looked past her to the frame embedded in the courtyard wall. Dark canvas. No image. He catalogued this without comment. You came through the south gate, he said. Earlier than we expected. Earlier than she stopped herself, started again. Where am I? Behind the colonnade, she could hear the soft-souled rush of people moving quickly, the sound of news traveling through stone corridors faster than anyone could walk. Somewhere in the city below, a vendor's voice was carrying on the night air, calling out the names of something being sold. Tidiok, she thought, the syllables arriving in her mind the same way Park Jun-hyuk's name had, without her sending for them. At the far edge of the torchlight, a servant girl stopped moving entirely. She had been crossing the courtyard with a ceramic bowl held in both hands, steam rising from whatever it carried, some evening delivery between kitchens, an ordinary
She was never
errand
supposed
in an
to
ordinary
return.
night. She stopped the moment Olivia's face caught the light. The
Do you
bowl
really not
stayed
remember?
level.
I don't
her
know
hands
you.
made the
I don't know
adjustment
where I
without
am.
direction from her body.
Your hand came through a
But the rest
painting
of
and
her
pulled
went
me through it, and I
motionless with
need
an
you to tell me what is
expression that was
happening.
not fear and not confusion, and was more specific and more disturbing than either. Recognition. The particular recognition of someone seeing something they were told they would one day see and had been holding space for, Yunbai. The name arrived same as the others. The girl's free hand came up and covered her mouth. Park Jun-hyuk's eyes moved to her, 2 seconds, precise, and catalogued that too. Emperor has been informed, Park Jun-hyuk said. Come with me. From behind a carved stone pillar at the far edge of the colonnade, barely audible beneath cedar branches shifting in the wind.
She was never supposed to return.
She was never supposed to return. A man stood in the pillar's shadow, older, robed in the formal layers of an administrator, his face carrying the specific blankness of someone who had just seen a calculation fail. His eyes moved over Olivia with the speed of someone checking facts. Min Seongryol. When she looked at him directly, he looked away first, and the way he did it, clean, deliberate, without embarrassment, was the tell of a man accustomed to being the one who decided what was observed and what wasn't. 2 guards moved into position beside her without being told. Not restraining, defining the perimeter of her available world. On the walkway above, between the east and west wings, a woman in silk the color of deep winter plums stood with her hands folded and looked down at the new arrival the way an engineer looked at an unexpected variable in a load-bearing structure. Lady Han Yeon-seo said something quietly to the attendant at her side. The attendant moved, not toward the throne room, away from it. The walk to the throne room gave Olivia time to construct 3 reasonable opening statements. Something measured. Something that communicated she was not afraid even if her heartbeat was currently providing evidence to the contrary. She assembled the words carefully, while her boots found the rhythm of the polished stone floors and the lanterns on either side of her through light and shadow in alternating sequence. All 3 statements died the moment she came through the doors. He was not on the throne. He was on the floor, at the base of the dais, standing in a position that required someone to have told him she was coming, and then made the deliberate choice to move, visibly. publicly, in front of his entire assembled
She was never
court,
supposed to
off the
return.
elevated seat of imperial authority and down to the floor where she would meet him at eye level. This was not protocol. The silence of the court said clearly that it had never been protocol. Hundreds of people stood along the periphery of the room, and none of them breathed. Li Kang crossed the floor toward her. He was exactly what the painting had suggested in the way that photographs of landscapes are exact and still cannot prepare you for the scale. Taller than the guards. The robes in layers of black and deep gold, the construction of them elaborate in a way that somehow did not slow him. His hair was long, dressed up in formal arrangement that had come slightly loose at the temples, as if the pin had been placed with care and then forgotten. His face was, she would search for better words later, in Aisha's kitchen over bad reheated food, and not find them. The kind of face that never had to negotiate for a room's attention because it arrived ahead of him and waited. The cold was there. She had expected it. What she had not expected was the fracture in it, the specific devastation of someone who had been practicing restraint for so many years that the practice itself had become visible. He stopped 3 feet from her. Close enough that the detail of him was unavoidable. The shadows his eyes carried, the very controlled pace of his breathing, the way his right hand had begun to rise toward her face, and then the muscle in his jaw tightened, returned to his side. He looked at her the way you looked at something you had spent years believing you would never see again. Do you really not remember? Not a question, not an accusation. The flattest, most exhausted version of a sentence she had ever heard, the kind that came from having asked it so many times in one's own head that the emotional weight had worn off and left only the words. I don't know you. She kept her voice level. I don't know where I am. Your hand came through a painting and pulled me through it, and I need you to tell me what is happening. Something moved through his expression and was gone. I didn't pull you through, he said. The curse responds to your touch. It has been responding to proximity to that painting for 11 years. I have not been able to prevent it, only monitor when it would happen. 11 years. She heard the flatness in her own voice. The painting has been in that gallery for 11 years. You are the third person to trigger a partial reaction. You are the first to come through. He held her gaze steadily. You are the first to come through because you are the only one who was supposed to. The right side of the room, a voice that had the practiced projection of someone accustomed to speaking in large formal spaces. Your Imperial Majesty. Lady Han Yon-seo stepped forward, hands still folded, tone calibrated at the precise frequency of reasonable concern. The woman has not been formally received. Her presence here before any verification process. He looked at her. One look. The sentence disappeared. Lady Han bowed. Her eyes, over the bow, stayed on Olivia's face with the steady attention of someone beginning a longer calculation. Li Kang turned back. He said something then, a name, a title, something that carried the weight of a specific history she had not lived, and yet landed on her like a claim. And the court reacted to it the way a building reacted to a structural shift. Not dramatically, but with the sound of something fundamental adjusting. At the edge of the room, Min Seongryol's face moved from calculation to the specific expression of a man whose contingency plan had just become necessary. High in the servant gallery, Yoon Bai, who had slipped inside ahead of the formal procession, pressed both hands over her mouth and shook. What would you do if the man from your dreams was real? Not a metaphor. Not a pattern your sleeping mind invented from accumulated longing. Real, standing 3 feet from you, looking at you with the patience of someone who had organized an entire identity around waiting. In a world you had no map for, in robes that cost more than your apartment, with 14 years of grief behind his eyes that he was currently holding back by force of will. Think about it carefully, because the answer matters. The quarters were not a prison. The silk on the low bed was real silk. She could tell by the weight and the way it held warmth. The incense burner near the window was jade, pale green and heavy, the kind of object that existed in museum cases behind glass in her world. From the window, the city spread below the palace in lantern-lit tiers, smoke rising from a dozen kitchen fires, the particular smell of sesame oil and something sweeter underneath it. Down in the market rows, she could hear a vendor still working the evening crowd, his voice carrying up the hill on the cold air. The same cheerful rhythm she'd heard from the courtyard, selling tteokbokki. She knew now, rice cakes in some winter variety, and the ordinariness of that sound against the ornate impossibility of everything else made her sit down heavily on the edge of the bed. She said. He looked at her for a moment, not evasively, but with the attention of someone deciding how much was honest versus how much was useful. Ask what you actually want to ask, he said. Did you bring me here on purpose? The pause was the length of a man deciding what version of the truth he was willing to give. I did not bring you here, he said. I was only ready for when it happened. Distinction landed immediately. She turned it over, examined the seam of it. He hadn't summoned her. He had a plan for her once she arrived. Those were different things, and the difference was not reassuring. She looked at the mural on the wall above the bed then. She had noticed it peripherally when she arrived, and not looked at it directly until now. A woman in imperial robes surrounded by fire, the flames painted in such detail that she could almost feel the heat. The face was rendered with enough specificity that the question it asked was not possible to avoid. She looked at the mural for a long time. Then she set the tea down and said nothing. He left without touching his cup. Lady Han Yonseo arrived the following morning without knocking, which was itself information. She carried nothing. No tea, no gifts, no performance of welcome. She sat across from Olivia in the carved wooden chair and settled into it with the posture of someone who had learned to be comfortable in uncomfortable places. More composed than I expected, she said. What did you expect? Confusion. Tears. Demands for an explanation. She studied Olivia with the attention of a woman revising an assumption. She was not composed, apparently. The original. She felt things very openly. I'm not her. Li Kang believes you are. Lady Han's hands remained still in her lap, which creates the same problem regardless of what you believe. He has canceled 2 regional treaty negotiations in the past month. He has not held a formal court session since the painting reacted 3 weeks ago, the first significant reaction it had shown in years. He had people monitoring that gallery for 11 years. Her voice stayed level, informational, a woman presenting data she had organized over time. That is what you have walked into. A man who has not been well for a long time and is now, because of your arrival, becoming something less predictable than unwell. He seemed controlled. Lady Han agreed. Yes, the court has learned to interpret which kinds of controlled are safe and which aren't. This kind is not. She looked briefly toward the window. The women who have been close to him have not fared well. I say this as someone who has watched it, not as someone who wishes you harm. It was a well-made argument. Olivia could hear the craftsmanship of it, the way the evidence was selected, the way the conclusions were offered rather than declared. She could also hear the places where the craft showed through. "You came to make me afraid of him," Olivia said. Lady Han stood smoothly and adjusted her robe. "I came to give you accurate information. What you do with it is yours to decide." At the door she paused, not for effect, or not only for effect. "Be careful about what Yunbai tells you. She has her own loyalties, and they are older than you are." In the corridor outside, Yunbai was passing with an armful of folded linens. Lady Han moved past her without acknowledgement. Yunbai watched her go with an expression that contained several years of complicated history compressed into 2 seconds. After the footsteps faded, Olivia let her eyes move to the small table by the door. Something sat there that had not been there before Lady Han arrived. Small jade, strung on a silk cord the color of old gold, a half-moon pendant, the jade so pale it was nearly white. She crossed the room and picked it up. Her hands shook. Not from cold. From recognition she had no right to, recognition that her body had processed before her mind caught up with it, the specific trembling of someone reaching for something they thought they'd lost. She knew what it was. She had never seen it before in her life. Yunbai spent the first hour of her assignment answering every question Olivia asked about everything except the things that mattered. Meal schedules, navigational rules for the palace, which corridors, which hours, which wings were permitted, forms of address for various officials, delivered with the thoroughness of someone who had rehearsed a very specific curriculum. She was good at it. Olivia let her be good at it until she wasn't willing to any more. "You recognized me," Olivia said. They were at the window, watching the morning movement in the courtyard below, servants crossing with deliveries, 2 officials in deep conversation walking the covered corridor along the east wing, the smell of something being cooked in a kitchen somewhere below them, ginger and soy and something sweeter. "In the courtyard when I arrived, you saw my face and your hands went still." Yunbai looked at the courtyard. "I recognized someone I had heard described. That's not what happened." Rehearsed version held for 3 seconds. Then Yunbai set down the cloth she'd been folding and turned to look at Olivia directly, which was the first time she had done so since the assignment began. "I have known what you look like since I was a child," she said, quiet, deliberate. "I was shown a description. I was not given your name. I was not told when." She stopped herself, picked a different path. "I cannot tell you more than that yet. Yet, the person who told me built it in steps." She said a short stop, steadier. "She said you would arrive not knowing. She said if I gave you everything at once it would be too much to receive. She said wait until the questions started finding their own answers." Yunbai looked down at the cloth in her hands. "She knew you well enough to know how you would need it given to you." Pendant against Olivia's collarbone, the trembling hands. "Who told you?" Olivia said. Yunbai shook her head, not refusing, unable. That night, in the dark of the chamber, Olivia heard her own ringtone. The specific ascending tone she had assigned to Aisha's calls 2 years ago and never changed. It came from inside the wall, then from the floor, then from nowhere at all. When she sat up and held her breath, the silence that followed had the specific quality of something that had just been there. Kim Do-yeon found her the next afternoon in the east courtyard, where she had gone because the walls of the quarters had started to feel like a decision she hadn't made. He fell into step beside her with the naturalness of someone who had been walking in this direction anyway. "There's a door left of the red column in the archive wing," he said, looking forward. "It's been unlocked for 3 days, not by accident necessarily." He had ink on the side of his left hand, the specific dark stain of someone who spent significant time pressing paper against still wet brushwork. "If you walked in that direction around the second bell of the afternoon, you'd find a secondary collection room that most people with access to the main archive don't know exists." She kept walking. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I found something 4 months ago that I don't fully understand. I've been looking for the right person to show it to." He glanced at her sideways, brief, evaluative. "I think you might be her." The archive room was cool and tall, the shelves of lacquered document boxes rising to a ceiling that the narrow vertical windows only partially lit, bars of afternoon light moving across the stone floor as the sun shifted. It smelled of old paper and cedar, and the particular dustiness of things that had not been touched in longer than the people still living could account for. Kim Do-yeon went to the 5th shelf, pulled a box from the middle, and withdrew a document that had been folded inside a second document. Camouflage so simple it had apparently worked for 4 months. He spread it on the reading table and angled the lamp. The overlay was visible as overlay once you knew to look, different ink, slightly different script, the work of a later hand writing over an earlier one. Below it, showing through in places where the top layer had faded thin, was the original. Kim Do-yeon read it quietly, keeping his voice below the ambient sound of the building. An imperial record, year of the water dragon. The woman called, the name below was legible. The name in the overlay had been removed, was separated from the official imperial record by administrative order, under seal of, here the overlay was thorough. The original mostly gone, only a fragment of the authorizing seal visible at the edge of the page. The original text, removed from the record by authorized action, the overlay departed of her own choosing. Who erased this? Olivia said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Kim Do-yeon opened his mouth, footsteps in the corridor. He had noticed it the first day. She understood now that he had been deciding what its presence meant ever since. She left something for you to find. Outside, the street vendor's cart was long gone, the lower city quiet in the deep of the night. Somewhere a temple bell rang the 4th hour. The city's night sounds were intimate and ordinary and entirely uninformed about what was happening in this room. Behind the screen at the far end of the corridor, a shadow remained very still and did not breathe. Park Jun-hyuk came to her without permission 3 days into her stay, which told her something about what he thought permission was worth when it mattered. He found her in the lower passage near the garden entrance. She had learned by now which routes the regular guard rotations left relatively unpopulated, and he was direct in the way of someone who had decided directness was the only approach worth the time. "You don't have the marks," he said. They were walking because he'd chosen a location with a long enough straight to talk while moving. The records describe 3 specific physical markers on the original woman, present from early childhood, not self-inflicted, birthmarks, documented by 3 separate imperial physicians. He looked at her steadily. "You don't have them. I had the attending servant check." She stopped walking. He waited with his hands clasped behind his back, in the posture of someone prepared for this reaction and unwilling to apologize for the cause of it. "I'm responsible for the Emperor's safety," he said. "His judgment regarding you is not objective. It has not been objective since the moment you arrived. Someone in this court needs to be asking questions that he is too invested to ask." She thought about what to be angry at. There was a real case for anger. She also found, when she examined it, that she trusted this man more for the transgression than she would have without it. "What is your actual concern?" she said. "That someone engineered your arrival. That the painting, the curse. The timing, that it was managed. That you are being used to destabilize an emperor who, whatever his faults, has been the functioning center of this empire for 14 years. And that you are either complicit and don't know it, or innocent and more endangered than anyone has told you. Including him. Especially him." He paused. "He would tell you nothing that made him easier to distrust. That is not dishonesty. That is the behavior of a man who has been terrified of losing this a second time since the moment you came through the gate." She looked at him. "Your memory," he said, quieter. "The original woman remembered everything clearly, all her life. If the soul carries through, if you are genuinely her continuation, the absence of your memory is not a natural condition. Someone either removed it or had it sealed." She did not answer this. She walked. Outside her door that evening, Yoonbai was waiting. She was not performing casualness. She was simply there, with the alertness of someone who had been watching for the right moment and recognized that this was it. "There is something in the archive," she said, fast, low, her eyes moving once down the corridor. "Something Kim Do-yeon found that Min Seong-ryol doesn't know he found. The box he showed you, that was real. But there's a second piece. You need to see it before tonight. Before Min Seong-ryol checks the decoy and realizes the original is still intact." They went after the second bell. Kim Do-yeon had moved the lamp from the reading table to the floor, lower and less visible from the corridor gap under the door. Yoonbai stood at the entrance, one hand on the frame, watching the passage. The smell of the archive at this hour was cedar and cold stone, and the faint ghost of whatever had been burned in the brazier down the hall earlier in the evening. The full document was longer than the fragment. Kim Do-yeon had found, beneath 4 separate overlay layers, each in a slightly different hand, each from a different decade of revision, the complete original account of the year of the water dragon. He read it quietly and translated as he went, his voice barely above the sound of the lamplight. The woman had not left. She had been removed, a formal word, authorized, carrying the specific weight of a sanctioned action rather than a crime, which was how it had been made to look in the early hours of the winter month's 3rd morning. One official had been present who had not been briefed on what was being erased. He had kept his own account, hidden it in a box of provincial tax records, and died 14 years later with the document still there. The authorizing seal, visible in the original beneath the layers of obliteration, belonged to Jin Timok. Olivia read the name and felt the shape of the story rearrange itself around the fact. "Who is?" The door opened. Lady Han-yeon-seo came in without hurry, assessed the 3 of them without drama, and moved to the edge of the table with the manner of someone joining a conversation they had been listening to for some time. "You found it," she said. "You knew it was here," Olivia said. "For 9 years." Lady Han looked at the document without touching it. I made a decision when I found it. Insurance has a longer, useful life than exposure. I'm telling you this so you have an accurate picture of my choices rather than a flattering one. She looked up. Jin Timok is in this palace. No official role, no title. He has survived every political season for 30 years by being the kind of person that official records don't quite know how to contain. Authorized her removal, Olivia said. He stood in the throne room afterward and told Li Kang she had chosen to leave. Lady Han's voice stayed even, informational, but something moved beneath the evenness. He wept doing it. I have heard this from 3 separate people who were present. He wept with what appeared to be genuine grief. She set her hands flat on the table edge. He needed Li Kang broken. Specifically broken in this way, by this loss, convinced of this lie, because a broken emperor signs documents without asking questions. Because an empire run by a grief-mad ruler is an empire run by the people who manage the grief-mad ruler. She looked at Olivia directly. By people like Min Xiangryol, and above Min Xiangryol by Jin Timok. Yunbai made a small sound at the door. Lady Han looked at her. Something passed between them, the compressed history of 2 people who had occupied the same difficult machinery from different positions inside it. I became what I became to survive in this structure, Lady Han said, not quite to the room. Then, to Olivia, Jin Timok knows you arrived. He knows what the document contains, and whatever he brought you here to do, it requires you to distrust Li Kang, which means it requires you not to know what you now know. Yunbai's tears were running silently, barely visible, the kind that came from something long carried being finally set down. She told me, Yunbai said, very small. The original she knew in the days before, she knew something was being arranged. She spent 3 days making sure things were in the right places, in the right hands, with the right instructions. She looked at Olivia. She described your face. She described the questions you would ask. She told me what order to give things to you. A breath. She said you wouldn't remember her. She said that was intentional. She said her voice held. She said you would know the pendant when you touched it. The far corridor. Footsteps. More than one person. Beak HW Erin did not announce herself. Olivia returned to her chambers after the archive and found her there, in the low chair by the window, occupying it with the stillness of something that existed in this space and others simultaneously. Up close she was striking in a way that was almost human and then wasn't quite, the proportions correct, the face beautiful, but carrying in the eyes the specific quality of something that had been watching the mechanics of this passage for longer than the Empire had existed. Portal is beginning to cycle, Beak HW Erin said, not opening her eyes, not turning from the window. Not because of anything you've done. The cycle has its own timing. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed. What do I need to do to go back? Nothing you haven't already begun. She turned then. Her eyes in the lamplight were difficult to hold. The portal responds to completion, not resolution. You don't have to repair anything. You have to understand what you are completing. That's not an answer. It's the honest answer. She stood, and standing she was taller than the chair had suggested. You want me to tell you what choice to make. I cannot tell you that because it is not my choice. I can tell you the condition. When you understand the full weight of what brought you here, the portal opens. That is all. My memory, the original woman surrendered it. She said it without ceremony, the way you stated a structural fact about a building. Not lost, given up. Deliberately sealed, in the days before she was taken, because she understood that arriving here carrying the unmitigated weight of that memory, the love, the loss, all 14 years of separation from her side of it, would make you unable to function. She loved him enough to protect a future version of herself she would never meet. Beak HW Erin looked at the pendant at Olivia's collarbone. The memory is there. It is accessible. You can reclaim it or leave it sealed. She made that decision yours to make. She moved to the door. Both are valid, she said. This is the only thing I will say that is not mechanical. Both are valid, and she knew that when she made the arrangement. In the corridor, a voice that had not been there seconds before. She was always going to come back. I made sure of it. Jin Timok stood in the space Beak HW Erin had just vacated at the threshold. He was older than any official she had encountered in the palace, his robes plainer, his posture carrying the specific ease of someone who had not needed to perform authority in so long that he had forgotten it required performance. He looked at her with an expression that occupied the territory between recognition and guilt and did not settle on either. You were in the archive, Olivia said. Been in most places in this palace for most of 30 years, he said. It is a useful habit. You authorized her removal. He said it the way a doctor said a diagnosis, without cruelty, without softness, with the specific flatness of someone who had made peace with a difficult fact long enough ago that they no longer needed to frame it. I needed Li Kang unreachable. I had studied the forms that grief took. I knew what worked and what wore off. The loss of her, told in exactly that way, would hold for decades. It held precisely as long as required. He looked at the pendant. I also knew the curse would bring her back eventually. I had planned for this. I needed to control the conditions of your arrival so that whatever you learned here, it served the right conclusion. Which was your fear of him. Your belief that he was what the Empire said he was, cold, erratic, dangerous. I needed you to carry that back through the portal, to the world you came from, in a way that would eventually prevent the portal from reopening. He paused. A portal that has brought back the woman he lost is a portal that will bring him through to find her. That possibility threatens an arrangement I have spent 30 years building. She was looking at him with the specific stillness of someone whose anger had passed the point of expression. She was a person, Olivia said. She was extraordinary. He did not hesitate, did not soften. I am aware. I am telling you this because at my age I find pretending more expensive than honesty, and because what you do with the truth now is not something I can control regardless. You have the document. You have Yunbai. The arrangement has failed. From behind her, from the doorway, the same doorway she hadn't heard anyone approach, Li Kang. Not in full imperial dress. He had been moving through the palace without ceremony, the way he apparently did when he needed to be somewhere quickly and didn't want the machinery of his position to slow him. He stood in the entrance looking at Jin Timok, and his face was not the cold, not the grief. Something underneath both of those things. Something from the layer of him that existed before the cold had been constructed as a necessary technology for surviving what had been done to him. He said Jin Timok's name the way you said the name of a wound, knowing it would hurt, saying it anyway because that was what wounds required. Jin Timok did not flinch. He had been expecting this moment for some time and had decided how to inhabit it. Olivia stood between them. The confession was formal. Jin Timok gave it in the archive, with Kim Do-yeon and 2 senior court officials as witnesses, and it ran through most of the night. Olivia sat in the corridor outside and heard, through stone walls, the voice of an old man giving a complete accounting of 30 years, with the thoroughness of someone who had decided that half measures were beneath the occasion. Min Seongryol arrived to destroy the document near the second bell, and found Kim Do-yeon waiting at the archive entrance holding the real version. The decoy was ash in a separate brazier. What Li Kang learned in that room, what had been signed in his name, what had been decided during the years he was too hollowed by a manufactured grief to question, what the Empire had actually been during his reign, she heard it in the changing quality of the silence from the corridor. The absence of certain sounds. The presence of others. When he came out, she was still on the floor, her back against the wall, the pendant turning over in her hands. He sat down beside her, not across, beside, on the floor of the corridor, without announcement or preamble. It was the first time they had occupied the same level in an informal space, and it had a different quality than every interaction the throne room had required. They sat in the way that people sat when they had run through all the useful things to say and arrived at the other side of language. She didn't leave, he said, after a time. No. Everything I built, the grief, the court, the way I held people at a specific distance for 14 years, all of it was organized around the fact of her choice, her choosing to go. He looked at the lamp at the far end of the corridor. There was no choice. She didn't minimize it. There was nothing to minimize it with. She sealed the memory, Olivia said. Beek HWA Rin told me. She did it before they took her. She knew I'd arrive not knowing, and she stopped. Started again. She thought receiving it all at once would be too much, so she arranged it in pieces. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said finally. She was careful with people she loved. She thought about what they could carry and what they couldn't. He looked at the pendant in Olivia's hands. She left that for you to find. I know. She would have left it somewhere she knew you'd encounter it. Not too early, not when you were still trying to locate your footing. He almost smiled, almost, the muscle near his mouth making the beginning of the movement and stopping. She was precise about timing. It was occasionally maddening. Below the palace, the city was beginning its early preparations, the first kitchen fires, the first vendors setting up before the dawn foot traffic. Somewhere in the market row, the smell of something frying in sesame oil rose up through the cold air toward the corridor window. An ordinary Tuesday in an extraordinary city, unaware of what had changed in the archive room overnight. "Portal is opening," she said. "I know. My friend in my world, she's been at the gallery." She looked at the pendant. "You said you'd seen her through the painting. She comes every evening." He looked at the corridor wall. "She speaks to you through the glass. She tells you that you have a lease that was prepaid, a plant she has been keeping alive, a sister who has been calling her." A pause. "She says she knows you're choosing. She asks you to come back." Olivia pressed the pendant briefly against her sternum. The jade was warm from her hands. In the modern gallery on the 9th evening, Aisha stood in front of the painting and pressed her palm flat against the protective glass. The museum staff had given up asking. Her researcher's pass was legitimate. She had made it legitimate through channels she would describe to Olivia later as a series of increasingly confident conversations. And she brought her own chair and sat in the East Corridor every evening until the institution ran out of a polite way to object. The painting had not changed. The man in imperial robes faced 3/4 away, eyes forward, exactly as he had in every photograph of the work she had been able to find online. He was not looking at her. He was not reacting to anything. He was paint on canvas in an empty corridor, and Aisha was a woman with her hand against the glass talking to her best friend through 30 feet of air and an unknown number of dimensions. "I don't know where you are," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced the steadiness. "But I know you're deciding something. I know it's yours to decide, and I know I don't get a vote." She paused. "But I'm putting it on record that you have a life here. You have things you were building. You have me, and you have your sister who has called me 7 times, and I have been telling her you're on a retreat with bad signal, which she believes because she has met you." Her voice cracked slightly, the one place the steadiness didn't hold. She left it. "Come back, or don't, but know what you're leaving." The glass cracked under her palm. A hairline fracture, spreading outward from the center of her hand in the shape of something that had been under pressure for a long time and had finally found a place to release. She took her hand back and looked at it. In the surface of the cracked glass, for one fraction of a second, a face behind the painting's image, not the 3/4 angle of the official portrait. Full face, dark eyes, looking directly at Aisha with the specific attention of someone who had needed to verify something and now had. Gone. She stood in the empty corridor for a long time. Then she sat back down in her chair and said to no one in particular, "Okay, so that's what's happening." Glow began on the second morning after the confession, the archive painting warming from within, the canvas developing the quality of a window with sun on the other side, something patient and inevitable. Beak H.W. Aaron appeared at the entrance. She looked at Olivia, then at Li Kang, then at the painting. "The portal cannot wait," she said, with the tone of a timetable being recited rather than a decision being made. Li Kang stood against the far wall. He had not moved toward Olivia since the corridor. He was not going to move toward her now. She understood this, understood what the restraint was made from. A man who had reached for something through a painting 14 years ago and been holding on in various ways since, choosing in this specific moment to offer something open rather than something that gripped. She understood what that cost him. The understanding made her look away from him briefly. Yunbai stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame. Not trying to be invisible, witnessing. The specific presence of someone keeping faith with a promise made to someone they had loved before any of this. The pull from the portal was beginning, not violent like the arrival, but steady, patient, a pull that had been waiting its whole existence for exactly this moment and was prepared to wait a little longer if necessary but not indefinitely. She looked at Li Kang. He looked back. She said his name, his actual name, the one that was not a title, the one she had found in the dream and kept in the place where names that mattered were kept, and she watched it arrive in his face. The court had never seen that face. The court had been given a version of him that could be managed, administered, related to diplomatically. This was the thing underneath that version, available for one unguarded moment in a room smelling of cedar and old ink, and it was devastating in the way of something that had been beautiful all along and kept in the dark. She turned to the portal. The pull intensified. Patient to urgent in the space of a few seconds. She stopped, turned back. The pendant was in her right hand. She looked down at it, the pale jade, the silk cord. The specific warmth of an object that had been carrying something for 14 years and waiting for the right hands. She thought about the woman who had sealed the memory as a gift, about what receiving the gift would mean, about grief arriving complete versus grief arriving in the pieces that could be survived, about Beak Hwarin's words, both are valid. She had said it once and she had meant it. Olivia set the pendant down on the archive table, not discarding it, setting it somewhere it would stay. She looked at Li Kang once more. The portal was insistent now. Her left foot crossed the threshold. In the modern gallery, the cracked glass went inward without sound, every fragment folding into the canvas as if the painting were inhaling, and the light blazed for exactly 4 seconds while Aisha threw her arm across her face. Silence. She lowered her arm, dark canvas, empty frame. The carved wood worn smooth at the corners, the lacquer long gone from the edges, the small bronze plaque beside it legible again. She read it now without the letters blurring, read the name on it and stood very still for a moment. The gallery floor was clean. No glass. The pendant lay on the polished wood directly in front of the frame, jade and silk cord, as if it had been placed there rather than arrived. Aisha crouched and picked it up. The warmth of it surprised her. Jade should have been cold. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. In the imperial world, in the archive room, Li Kang walked to the table where the pendant had been. The pendant was gone. He looked at the dark canvas. He stood there until the early light came through the narrow windows and the bar of it crossed the floor in its slow movement and eventually reached the wall where the painting hung. Then he put his palm flat against the canvas. He spoke to the dark surface, to whatever was on the other side of the seal, something quiet enough that Yunbai in the doorway could not make out the words, only the register of them. Not a command, not a plea, something in between, the specific register of something that had been held for a long time being finally said. The painting did not react. And then, at the point of contact, his palm against the canvas, the faintest crack. A hairline fracture at his fingertip, spreading outward through the paint with the slow deliberateness of something that knew exactly where it was going. Not inward, outward. Moving through the canvas toward the other world. In the space between, the passage that was neither gallery nor archive, but the narrow seam connecting them. The space that Beak Hwarin had maintained for 30 years with the specific attention of something that understood mechanics better than intention. She opened her eyes. She had been the keeper of this passage through 30 years of arrangements and staged tragedies and the careful management of grief as political infrastructure. She had seen what curses fed on and what they required and what they produced. She had calculated the conditions of this portal with a precision that had never failed her. She had never seen the portal initiate from the inside. She had never seen it move outward, toward the sealed world. Beak Hwarin stood in the space between the worlds and felt, for the first time in 30 years, that she had been accounting for the wrong variable. The crack continued to spread. And in the city below the palace, entirely unaware, the first morning vendors were setting up their stalls. Tidiak and grilled things, and tea carried in ceramic flasks against the cold, calling out their inventories to an early street, cheerful and purposeful and completely uninterested in the particular archive room above them, where the rules of a 30-year-old curse were being rewritten by a man pressing his palm against a painting. Would you stay in his world, even if it means losing your own, or would you find that the boundary between worlds was never as fixed as the curse required you to believe? The pendant is warm in Aisha's hand. The crack moves through the canvas with the patience of something that has all the time it needs. Yunbai stands in the doorway and doesn't leave. And the one person who designed the ending, who spent 30 years engineering grief as architecture, who wept in a throne room delivering a lie, who built an empire on the specific shape of a man's loss, sits in a formal room with 2 witnesses and realizes, for the first time, that the variable he failed to account for was not the portal. It was what the portal was made of. It was never the curse. It was always this.